called the most sweeping overhaul of financial regulation since the Great Depression. New rules for Wall Street and banks meant to protect Main Street and consumers. But is the overhaul overkill, and how would it actually help average Americans? Richard Socarides is a former White House special assistant to President Bill Clinton, and Brad Blakeman is a former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. Thank you both for joining us. Brad, one analyst says be careful of unintended consequences. If these regulations cost banks money, for example, will that be passed on to taxpayers?
You bet it will be passed on to taxpayers, because now they have to deal with more regulation from government. And indeed, not only the taxpayer will be hit, but the investor will be hit, because the investment houses are going to pass those costs that they now have to incur for bigger government control on to the investors. So they're going to get hit twice. Patty Ann, the hallmark of a free market is certainty and credibility. This bill offers neither.
Patty Ann, let me just say that banks always, there's one thing you can be absolutely certain of. Banks always say, if you regulate us more, it will hurt the consumer. That's their classic defense. Luckily, Washington this time didn't buy it, because the system is so clearly broken. We had to move on, and there are clear consumer protections in this bill, and so if it passes like we think it will, I don't think they'll be allowed to pass these costs on to the consumer.
So you believe that banks will just absorb any increased costs by cutting into their own profits?
First of all, I think a lot of the Wall Street banks have made a lot of money, and they're making record profits, and I think some of their profits will, if they have additional costs, they'll have to use up some of their profits. And I think this Consumer Protection Board that's being set up at the Federal Reserve for the first time ever, there'll be a consumer protection watchdog at the Federal Reserve. I think that board will be careful to make sure that these fees can't be passed on.
Okay, Brad, in addition to higher costs, you say these financial reforms result in unprecedented government power. Explain that.
You bet. Don't we have enough government? Look at all the agencies we have, including Congress, who has the constitutional duty for oversight. We have the SEC, we have the Commerce Department, we have the Justice Department, we have the Treasury, we have the Fed. They're creating more government. My God, they should take a look at the government that exists today and make it work. Make it work smarter.
I think that's an excellent
and
point,
more credible for the consumer.
If it had worked, if the government we had at work regulating the financial industry, if the government was working 2 years ago, we wouldn't have had this financial crisis.
So your answer is to grow government?
Well,
your answer is to grow government and cost the taxpayer more.
My answer is we got to do something.
All right, let Richard talk now.
No, my answer is we got to do something. We got to try a new approach, because the regulatory structure we had in place 2 years ago clearly failed, because we had a financial crisis of epic proportion on our hands, because we had over a decade of inherent inability and unwillingness to regulate this sector.
All right.
Now we're going to try something different.
Overhaul the government.
Go ahead, Brad. Do we still have Brad there? Oh, brother.
Sorry.
All right.
Don't grow government.
We'll stick with. Oh, it sounds like Brad's back.
Brad
back? Okay, yeah, Brad, Vanguard President and CEO William McNabb even is saying reform is necessary to restore the trust of investors, which is at all-time lows. You have a lot of people, even on Wall Street, saying there are definitely parts of the system that need to be fixed. What about that?
Absolutely. Fix that which is broken. Very simple. Don't create more government and layered government when we have about as much government as we can take.
Well, I'm
be
not
reasonable,
sure. I'm
be
really not sure
responsible.
that this is going to create any more
government needs to do.
This is not really
you
going
guys
to create
created,
more
Richard,
government.
a 2,000-page bill
but listen,
that nobody's read.
It's a 2,000-page bill. It's a lot of bill, but it's not more government. It's a different kind of government. It's a different structure. And we will see, I think, that number one, we're going to have more. This is all going to be about consumer protection. Number two, these costs are not going to be allowed to be passed on to the consumer.
Brad, last word, 10 seconds.
All you need to know is this, Patty Ann, is listen to what Senator Dodd said, the chairman of the Banking Committee. We don't know what this bill is going to do until it's enacted. Is that the way we want the legislature to govern?
All right, we're leaving it there. All right, Brad Blakeman, Richard Socarides, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Fire and water. Take a look at these pictures. It's amazing.